Usually when people found out I was in the military, they would stop helping me. So that was kind of the big part, right? And I agree with you about the military medicine, right? Like they're really good about very acute injuries, right? Like somebody gets blown up in Iraq, for instance, right, or Afghanistan. Right? They're really good about trying to help save their life. But when it comes to these long-term kind of like oddball things, they're not set up for that. So it makes sense to a certain extent. It's like you said, it sucks, but it makes sense that they wouldn't have been able to help you with that because they didn't. They're not really set up for that kind of thing, largely speaking. But I always knew, no matter how many times people kept telling me it's all in my head, that I knew it wasn't. I knew that part of it was, right? Like, and there's no doubt about it. Like your mind amplifies things, right? Like, so I knew there was something there and I knew it took it from like an 8 to a 10, right? Or a 6 to a 10 even, right? Like whatever. I knew it amplified it, but I also knew in my heart, in my gut, that there was absolutely something wrong. And even though people didn't want to help me, didn't want to believe me, I knew it. So I just was like, no, I have to prove this.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Kevin Brewer, who is a Navy veteran that endured 13 years of undiagnosed failing health issues. After finally turning things around, Kevin is thriving as a Spartan athlete and resilience coach. Kevin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into your story, if there's one word or a few words you could use to describe how you are feeling today going into this recording, how would you describe that?
Phenomenal.
Good. Awesome. Glad to hear. I know that one always catches people off a little bit, off guard a little bit. But yeah, I'm really excited to hear your story. You were my last recording of 2024, as today is actually New Year's Eve. So
Okay.
obviously, when this episode releases, we'll be far from that. But I really appreciate you just taking the time to be on the show and sharing your story and wrapping up 2024 on an awesome note. And I will pass it off to you to share more about yourself with the listeners.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Just a quick note, it just started lightning here, so if it something crazy happens or you start hearing some like thunder or stuff, that's what's going
No worries.
on. So yeah, no, my story is kind of crazy. I had a lot of medical issues, of course, but kind of started off as a kid, growing up with and again, not to bash my father, he passed away in April. We had a good relationship at the end, but he was alcoholic growing up. Kind of alcoholism runs in my family, so when I joined the military, it was kind of just more just to get out of the area. And it really just, it was kind of on a whim. A buddy of mine was like, hey, I'm going to the Navy. You want to sign up with me? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I literally signed up. Now, my dad was a Navy vet, so I had some experience with the Navy, but that was kind of how it got into me. But then I got in, again, long story short, I got into the Navy, did my tour in Hawaii first, started in Hawaii. I was a CTT. I think you're Navy too, right? I believe. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I was
CTT, so
Navy.
intel guy. And so I did my first tour on subs doing direct support out of Hawaii. And then I ended up in here in the DC area at NRO. And while I was here, I ended up getting deployed to Afghanistan. I found that out while I was on a 2-week translant to give training. So again, I came to shore duty and I ended up on a ship. I got called while I was out to sea to tell me I was going to go to Afghanistan. I said, well, I guess you never told me what shore I was going to be on. So I spent 3 months in training at Fort Bragg and then a year in Afghanistan. While I was in Afghanistan, my son was born. So I was our second kid. And then, yeah, when I got back, so this is kind of where the story starts with my health issues. On my way back from Afghanistan, I had a real bad sinus infection. So I was using, was it the Sudafed or whatever the sprays? And the Nasonex, or the Vicks Vapor Rub you put on your chest. I was like the spray version of that. And I was doing it like every 10 minutes or so. I did not know that there was like the Sudafed and all that stuff. I was not into that kind of world or anything like that. So I basically gave myself a heart attack on the way home, overdosed on that on the way home on the plane. And yeah, so that was really bad. I was also just getting over, I think, swine flu about that time. So it was like 2008 time frames. I think the swine flu was going through, and I got real sick when on the way back. So I got back. I had a hernia that needed to be repaired. I had a sinus infection that ended up being my entire left side, and half my right side was completely filled. Cavity, the sinus cavity was completely filled, and then the swine flu was getting over. So, and quick medical history, I was born with psoriasis, so, and then it turned into psoriatic arthritis, and I didn't know when it was a thing, but so I had some issues for potential ligament damage anyway. When I got back and they put me on a long-term antibiotic, they put me on an antibiotic that also causes ligament damage, and I didn't know that. And I was getting over being sick, so I was already kind of a little bit weak anyway. And, being 22, 23, I was, said went to the gym, lifting weights, and I felt something pop up in my, my neck area, upper back and neck area, and I was like, well, the good smart thing to do is probably stop lifting weights, but the next smart thing to do is to go play basketball. So, of course I did that. That night, kept getting woken up in the middle of the night. My heart rate was just like going crazy. My chest felt like I was like on fire, just hurting. So I was like, man, I don't know what's going on, but I feel like I'm having a heart attack. And I was kind of weird. I'm like 20-something years old. So I was like, I was like, maybe it's nothing. I went back to sleep and it kept waking me up. So I was like, all right, I probably should go in. And that kind of started a whole cycle of going in, my heart rate just kind of spiking out of nowhere, just going, would never go up, never really going away, elevated heart rate. I had chest pain, neck pain going down my arm, all that kind of stuff. So effectively, the symptoms of a heart attack and or a stroke 24/7. And the more physical activity I did, the worse it would get. Well, of course, because I had just gotten back from Afghanistan, they really just phoned it in and said it's PTSD. And I just kept getting thrown around. I had a really tough time just trying to get anybody to even take me serious because of that. I had a couple of doctors that would in the military that would kind of try to help me out, but for the most part, they just threw me off and said I had PTSD. So I self went to psych and talked to psych, and they were like, "Yeah, you need to get a second opinion on your heart." So I had to go around my primary doctor to see another doctor in the Navy to get outside of the hospital I was in, which was at Bethesda at the time, to go see another cardiologist, just to try to get an unbiased opinion. And that guy at least helped me start the process of kind of getting wrapped around mentally. And he just simply told me, look, if you can press on your chest and recreate the symptoms, it's not your heart. So like from that point on, I would just like push it on my chest constantly every time it would kick in. Like, all right, it hurts. And sometimes I think I did more damage that way than I did well, just because I pushed on it so much and so hard. So fast forward about a year later, I finally was getting out of the Navy, and they tried to talk me in because I kept having all these issues. They kept saying like, "Well, how are you going to get out? You have these medical issues and all this stuff." And I was like, "Look, you're not helping me anyways. Like, I need to figure out what's going on." So I ended up getting out, and then again, never really went away. So I started going through the VA system. And the VA system didn't really help out. Kind of same thing where it's like, hey, we're going to do all these tests and send you to all these different people. I, saw a couple different, like orthos. Saw like the vein doctors. They thought maybe I had like a thoracic outlet syndrome. So I went through this like battery of tests and stuff. Saw a pain management doctor. She was not very helpful. Just kind of kept going through the whole system, right? Like they just never really helped me. And meanwhile, the whole time I'm getting progressively worse every single year. About 5 years in, I finally I just said, screw it, I'm gonna get out of the VA system. I went into like the civilian healthcare system. I said, all right, look, I don't fully know. I was like, but I feel like I feel it in my back first because there's one thing people don't tell you is they talk about heart attack, right? They say you have chest pain that radiates to your back. But if you have back pain that radiates to your chest, it's really hard to know the difference because when it first starts, you don't necessarily pay attention to that. It's kind of like the compilation where it's like really starts building up. So I said, you know what? I kind of think I feel it in my back first, but nobody's ever checked out my back. So we started going through that route. And I went to like pain management on the civilian side. I started getting some injections and then started seeing a chiropractor. And I was fairly stable at that point. Then it was kind of helping out to a certain extent, but I had to go all the time. Like it was like constantly had to go like 3 times a week minimum. And it was only kind of semi-stable for a couple of years at that point. And then once my insurance changed, they stopped paying for the chiropractor, so I couldn't go as frequently, and it started getting again progressively worse. And progressively worse, I mean, I started having more and more like chest pain. I started having more and more mental issues, meaning that I was having like starting to have panic attacks and things like that. And the pain started going higher. I started having other symptoms in other parts of my body that didn't really make sense, and all these different things kept coming up. And because they weren't logical necessarily. According to everybody, the doctors kept dis other doctors kept dismissing me more and more. I think around the 2017, 2018, I actually ended up having the point where it was so bad I couldn't bend over. And that ended up being, they figured out I had tethered cord syndrome, which is effectively your spinal cord doesn't elongate long enough. So every time I bent over, my spine was getting pulled, which then caused all kinds of lower body pain. So I was to a point where I can only bend over twice a day. I can only get in and out of my car twice. So at that point, I was coaching youth softball, my daughter's softball team. So I had to decide, I had to go to work. That was my first time in and out of the car, getting, to and from work. And then I could stop one other time. So if I had to get gas in my car, I had to plan it on non-practice days. I had to make sure to go ahead and like have that foresight. It's like I can't go to practice and get gas because then it would just literally destroy my body. So it was kind of like really a weird time. Now, thankfully, my work was very helpful for me at this time. It's not always the case with stuff like this, which when you have a lot of health issues, your workplace isn't always as accommodating. But they ended up giving me like a standing desk because all I can do is stand and kneel. So I was kneel, I'd turn my chair around, kneel on that, and I'd go fluctuate between standing and kneeling on my chair. And then they give me like a room to just go lay down for a couple minutes to like decompress because that's standing all day. It's pretty tough on your body too. When we go through trainings and stuff, they let me just kind of like lay down for a little while in the middle of the training, things like that. So like they were really accommodating. It was very, and like everybody there was like super like nice about it and everything because they knew I had all these different issues and stuff. So I was very, very thankful that I was at that place, honestly. So when I finally got the surgery for that, I started feeling a little bit better for about, I don't know, six to 9 months. And then it tanked really hard again. I started having lots of neurologic issues. I started getting brain fog a lot, started getting migraines. I started just having a lot of lower body pain and hip pain. And then again, it's progressively getting worse. During this span, I ended up having to call an ambulance while at work because my heart rate would spike. It would get up to like 160 at times just sitting still. And then I was pass out. Part of that was the panic of it, and then part of it was just the heart rate. So I ended up leaving in an ambulance 2 or 3 times from work. Ended up staying in the hospital a couple of times because I was get to the hospital and the pain was uncontrolled. They couldn't figure out what it was. They couldn't get the heart rate down, even when I was sleeping. So I was on like morphine for a little while. I was on all these different things, and it just was completely uncontrolled. But then all of a sudden it would just kind of stop and kind of go away enough to get me out of there. And they'd be like, okay, well, I don't know what happened. So we'll just send you home. I'm like, well, that's helpful. And then the cycle would start back over, right? So eventually it got to the point, again, progressively getting worse and worse and worse. Around 2020, right before COVID happened. Actually, 2019, end of 2019, it started getting really, really bad. I started to get to the point where I couldn't even sit on the left side of my left butt, right? Like I couldn't sit. I could use a cushion, fold it in half, and then put it under my right butt cheek and like sit on top of that. And that was the only way I could get it because if I put pressure on my left side, it would be so painful that my heart rate would shoot up. And I know it didn't make sense. It made no logical sense, but it happened every single time. So I was getting to that point where I was like trying to fly to Arkansas where my sister-in-law was. We're gonna go for Thanksgiving. My wife and kids had already gone down. I was finished up some at work, and then I was gonna fly down the next day. And this was gonna be the first time I actually I think flown in a while. I got on the plane. I sat down. My right side started hurting at that point, and I immediately had a panic attack. And I ended up standing up, getting off the plane, and saying, "I can't do this." Like the flight attendants were like, "What the hell just happened?" I was like, "I can't do it," and I just walked off and I just kept walking. And they're like, "I guess he's not coming back." So my bags went to Arkansas, and then I went home, and that was kind of the turning point for me. And it just kind of like it got real bad real fast after that. So that was November 2019. The next couple months, I had so much neurologic pain, nerve pain all through my body that I was like, by the time I got to work, I was. Have you ever seen those Yeti ice packs? You know what I'm talking about?
I think so.
Yeah. So I had like 3 of those Yeti ice packs because they would last forever. Those things, by the way, are awesome. I had to take 3 of them to work, literally sitting on them the entire time. So I had to sit on them, had one on my leg, on my hamstring, and one on my lower back, and then one on my thigh. And then I would have a heating pad that would cycle the heat and cold. And then I had, those 10 units, so like stimulators.
Yeah.
I had one of those on. I had all of that going at the same time. That was the only way I could get to work. And by the time I got to work, my body was in such disarray. I'd have a panic attack at work. And then eventually I got to the point where I was like, look, I can't even stay at work. So I went in and told my bosses in about February, March, I said, hey, I can't keep doing this. Like by the time I get to work, my body's so fucked up that I just can't stay. Like I'm on panic attack. I want to call 911 every single time. Like I just feel like I'm dying. And they kind of worked out for me. They weren't really supposed to, but they worked it out to where I could kind of work from home and stuff because I was doing a lot of stuff that was not, so again, working in the intel industry, it's kind of hard to work from home. But I was doing some stuff working with federal law enforcement at the time that I had enough to do at home that they let me kind of under the table work from home. So I did that for a little while, and then COVID happened. So then we had to start going into the office again. But then we're like really isolated. And if you haven't been able to tell, I have Tourette's. I have audible Tourette's. So I like sniffle a lot and blink a lot and things like that. And I clear my throat a lot when you're in a COVID environment. Again, I was already having enough issues already anyway, but then had COVID on there, everybody's now in a panic. So this one lady, because it's so quiet, started hearing me do that stuff constantly and then got nervous. So she was the contract lead at the time. So she ended up like overstepping her bounds and getting me kicked out and said if I didn't leave this right this minute, she was going to have me fired. And I was like, I can't really do much about this. I guess I'll go home. Well, the government people didn't like that at all. So that she ended up getting fired. But thankfully, it actually worked out for me because then they're like, hey, you know what? You're on all these rheumatologic, drugs and stuff. You don't know what's going on. You're kind of high risk. The government's kind of determined you fall in this high risk category, so you can just stay home and get paid. I was like, shit, that works out. So it kind of helped me out. But at this point, if I turned my neck to the right too many times, I would basically get like flu-like symptoms for a week. If I would look up, I would effectively become paralyzed for a couple hours and head to toe pain 12 out of 10. Like it was just constant. And I was like, the only thing I could do is like lay on the ground and cry because I was in so much pain. I was having multiple panic attacks a day. And at this point, I was like, look, I don't even want to, I'm afraid of death, but honestly, like I cannot, this isn't living. I'm not even living. It's like, I'm just done. So I was in my closet one day and I was like, all the stuff kind of kicked in and I was like, fuck it. I'm not even gonna go to the hospital this time. I'm just going to lay here and die. And, again, I'm not particularly religious, but I said, God, I don't do this. I don't know how to do this anymore. It's a long time. I was like, but, if you let me survive this, I'll figure out what the hell's going on and I'll help people. I'll fix it and I'll help other people. And of course, I didn't die because I'm here talking to you. And I said, all right, I guess I got to start figuring this out. So I said, look, and doctors aren't really helping me. I'm, seeing a rheumatologist. The rheumatologist isn't really helping me. And these doing these different rheumatologic drugs. I was on 3 different drugs for that, and I started the biologic injections and stuff, and got real sick from that. And I was like, look, I don't want to do that anymore. It's like, so doctors aren't listening to me. I'm not a doctor, obviously. It's like, but I am an analyst. So I can start looking at my MRIs and all this other stuff, and I can look at it and say, hey, I can look at two things and say one doesn't look like the other. So let me start there. So I started just looking at my own MRIs. And I would just go through them and I would just stop on different slices and stuff. And I would look online and try to find those same images and say, all right, does anything look different from what's expected to be normal, vice what's on mine? And I found several things in there that were out of proportion, like they weren't supposed to be there, or several different things. So one of them was this thing called Chiari malformation. So the cerebral tonsils on your brain are coming down through the hole in your skull, causing crowding and pressure on your brainstem. I realized I had that, so I started to go down that route and started seeing doctors for that. Well, they didn't really believe me, but I ended up seeing a doctor at Johns Hopkins, a neurosurgeon there. That was over Zoom. And he's like, no, we're not going to, we don't have that, blah, blah. I was like, okay. And I pulled up my MRI. I said, hey, this is how I measured it. Where did I go wrong then? And he goes, well, you didn't really do it wrong, but I just don't think that's what it is. And I was like, well, so you're admitting I have it, and the symptoms fit, but you don't want to even explore it at all. Yeah. I was like, okay, that's really helpful. So I was back to square one on that. I was like, nobody would help me with that. So I was like, okay. So I ended up finding there was another thing. It was a soft tissue overgrowth by the C2 vertebrae. It was called a PANUS. I think it's called PANNUS, which is typically found in people who have like rheumatoid arthritis, which kind of made sense because I had psoriatic arthritis. So they figured that out. I ended up finding that, and I was like, okay, I don't know what this is at first. I went on Reddit to a subreddit called Ask Docs. I just posted a picture and I said, hey, I see this in here. What is this? Whatever. And they told me what it was. So with these two different things, the Panis and the Chiari, I ended up finding an article on Facebook that stated that all of all places, and it was a study that was done in like 2014 on children because the stuff's usually found in children that stated that if you have a mild Chiari malformation and a Panis together, it typically means you have cervical instability. And when they and which meaning the ligaments holding your skull and your neck together or on your skull onto your neck were too loose. So when you would move your head and stuff, it would effectively move too much and hit your brainstem or your spine, stuff like that, cause all kinds of neurologic problems. Makes sense. And they said that when they fixed the instability, it solved both those other problems. So I was like, okay, well, if it's not Chiari, this is one of the issues they talked about it could be. So I said, let me look into that. I found a doctor in Colorado who does stem cell therapy. It's a special procedure focusing on what they call it's called CCI, cranial cervical instability. He's produced his own procedure and everything, but it's all out of pocket. So I ended up getting in with him, got all the testing I actually needed to get done, and found out that I have that, and I have a couple other spots on my cervical spine that were also loose and stuff. So basically, my neck was jacked up, and I ended up finding out later my thoracic spine is also too tight and stuff. So a lot of rigidity in there, which is probably what caused the other stuff too. So I got to the doctor in Colorado, started doing the stem cell therapy through him, a couple rounds through him. So I started out when I started with him, I could barely go from my couch to my fridge. 4 treatments later, actually, well, 3 treatments later, and then I did a fourth one this year too, just to kind of like try to top it off kind of thing to see how much better we could get. But I was good with after three. I did 10 Spartan races this year in 2024 and completely changed my life. So that's kind of the long-winded version, I guess, of my stories.
It's crazy to me when we look at the medical industry. I mean, there's the military side of it, right? Where I
Yeah,
feel like it is just difficult to get answers for things like that are that complex, right? Because
yeah,
obviously the military isn't there to serve us medically. We are
right.
there as service members to serve the military in
Yeah,
the United States. So as much as it's frustrating, I understand the purpose of why. If you aren't able-bodied in the military, they just kind of brush you off. And that's its own conversation. But what's interesting to me is, when people talk about like be your own advocate when it comes to anything medical, I mean, you took that to like a whole other level where you're
yeah.
actually finding studies and research and I don't think that that's unique for a lot of people when it comes to medical stuff these days, but I'm curious how you didn't give. I mean, you obviously got to a point where you were almost going to give up, but that sounds like it was a long journey to even get there. Like, what kept you going to even advocate for yourself as much as you did up to that point?
Yeah, so again, usually when people found out I was in the military, they would stop helping me. So that was kind of the big part, right? And I agree with you about the military medicine, right? Like they're really good about very acute injuries, right? Like somebody gets blown up in Iraq, for instance, right, or Afghanistan, right? They're really good about trying to help save their life. But when it comes to these long-term kind of like oddball things, they're not set up for that. So it makes sense to a certain extent. It's like you said, it sucks, but it makes sense that they wouldn't have been able to help me with that because they didn't. They're not really set up for that kind of thing, largely speaking. But I always knew, no matter how many times people kept telling me it's all in my head, that I knew it wasn't. I knew that part of it was, right? Like, and there's no doubt about it. Like your mind amplifies things, right? Like so I knew there was something there, and I knew it took it from like an 8 to a 10, right? Or a 6 to a 10 even, right? Like and whatever. I knew it amplified it, but I also knew in my heart and my gut that there was absolutely something wrong. And even though people didn't want to help me, didn't want to believe me, I knew it. So I just was like, no, I have to prove this. So, and again, based on, because I'm an analyst, that's my job. I was just like, what, I'm determined to just figure this out. I can look at one and, look at two different things. I went through multiple diagnoses myself, right? So, and the way I did this effectively, and I think this is actually probably why people don't do it because they can't do this part. And it's not they can't, that they don't know how to. So hopefully this helps them is I would find something that maybe fit, and then I would start going, okay, can I find reasons that I still believe this? But can I also find reasons that it's clearly not true? And I would just keep going through like that. So I wouldn't go to the doctor about every single thing that I believed it was, because usually when you do that, that's where people mess up. They just see like, oh, it might be this. I'm gonna go to the doctor and ask him. Well, you can do that a couple times. And then after that, they just think that you're just, it's a Munchausen or whatever it is. Or they just think you're a hypochondriac or whatever. So they actually do stop helping you. So you have to kind of go to a different doctor, but if it's in the same system, then you're kind of flagged. And so it gets really complicated. So you got to be careful with that. And I was conscious of that. So I would just say, okay, I would go through these things myself and kind of figure out different ways. And there would be a couple times I'd go and be like, hey, I know this might be a little bit far-fetched, but can you explain to me why you think it may or may not be this? So I try to word it properly with my primary care doctor and stuff like that. And then he would explain to me, like, okay, that makes sense. And I wouldn't press it. I was very cautious about what I did press. So as I found the cervical instability stuff, I really pressed hard into that. And then like I said, I ended up going to the doctor in Colorado, but it was all outside of insurance. So I had to pay for it out of pocket. It wasn't cheap by no means, but I'd pay it 10 times again. So that was the big driver there, is that like in my gut, I knew it wasn't just mental. I knew there was something missing. And I guess I'm too determined, like internally, just like take the word no at face value most of the time and just say, no, okay, well, if you're not, maybe you're not smart enough then, right? Like, so that's kind of was my mentality. Like, okay, well, then you don't know what it is, but that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't. So that's kind of what, I just, and again, I would cycle through, again, it's mental health stuff, right? Like I would cycle through. There'd be times where I'd really push hard for it. And there'd be like several months to a year where I would just like, fuck it, I'm done. I would just give up. I'd stop trying. And then like I would catch something else happen, like, usually tied around like, like coaching my kids' softball and baseball teams or something else. I'd have some kind of a deeper mission kind of thing set in, like, okay, now I need to do this for this person or whatever. So it was usually something tied in like that. Like I was like, hey, no, I have this new mission. And then as I would dwindle down even further, it would be harder and harder. And then all of a sudden, I'd have to like have that pity party cycle and then pull out of it. So I did go through cycles for sure. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of like I'd have moments where I would just kind of stop and look and like, okay, like I'm not trying anymore. Like I need to keep trying, like for my family, for myself, or whatever. Like I would just, kind of go through those cycles. So I would just try to find a reason to pull myself out. And along the way, and actually, I forgot to mention this part. What I ended up, another thing I ended up started doing was, because I was coaching youth sports too, I was trying to find a way to better myself at that. And I came across a lot of this kind of like, sports psychology stuff. And I started to go down that path, kind of to help the kids, at first. So, the teams I was helping, but it ended up oddly helping me more because then I was able to start working on my own self. So one thing I had was I was overweight. I was like 240 plus pounds at one point. And so I knew that that was a contributing factor, at least to some of the other like underlying health stuff. So I was like, well, I need to get that under control. So I found a way to kind of start weaning myself down on weight. So I got that down really good without starving myself, because I was like, I need to be sustainable. And it needs to be a whole lifestyle thing. So I sustainably lost weight there, figured out my own nutritional lifestyle and way to help have medicine or food be my medicine. So I was, able to control a lot of the underlying like psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis that way. So I can get off the medications that way. So then I can say like, well, you can't use that as an excuse anymore. So that's not the problem. So there's something else. And also because medications cause all kinds of other problems too, later down the road, I knew I needed to get off them. So again, and I also knew that if I were to get better, I'd want to be at that a lower weight anyway, because I was a very sporty person prior to this. So it's like I needed to get down to that anyway, because once I figured this out and fixed it, I want to get back to sports related things. So that was kind of a thing there. But then I was able to kind of control my panic attacks to a certain extent that way. So I was able to recognize them and go, okay, well, instead of going to the hospital all the time, I could talk myself out of this panic attack. Going, okay, I could recognize and go, well, yes, everything's elevated right now, but if I can kneel down real quick, take a couple deep breaths, and if I can get it to start, because I would get that every had a panic attack. You start getting like this tunnel vision, like you like literally
Yeah.
see the light and everything, right?
Yep.
Like I started seeing that stuff like, oh God, I'm dying right now, right? I'm passing out, I'm gonna die. My heart's exploding. That was one thing. I'm having a stroke or my heart's exploding. That was every single time I go through my head. So I go, okay, well, let me take a couple deep breaths. If I can kneel down and start to get the spirals to go away, then I can go, okay, well, then it's just whatever the underlying thing is. It's not my heart attack, it's not a heart attack, it's not a stroke. So I could calm myself down that way. So there was a lot of processes in there for the mental side of it. That was like I was able to use the sports psychology to like really help myself. And then as I'm coming out of it, I use it again to start, okay, well, again, I was having issues going from the couch to the fridge. So again, I knew that as I was getting these treatments, I was going to have to start tolerating movement and things again. And that was the only way to be able to fix myself. So I started going, okay, well, let me start trying to walk because I couldn't walk. I lost all this weight without being able to walk. So that's why I always knew weight management is food management. But I was like, okay, I want to be able to walk, obviously. So I was like, I started like 200 meters and it would take me like an hour, like 20, 30 minutes to an hour. And it would take me hours to recover from this. So, but I would start there and I was like, and I started telling myself, okay, it's going to suck. It's going to hurt. It's going to cause symptoms to come up. I have to look at it and go, did it make it the worst I've ever had it? If not, then I didn't make it worse. It's just my body remembering what it felt like. So it was telling me to stop. So I would just kind of cycle through that. And then as I got to the point where being able to walk that was becoming normal and I could do it in a timely manner and not spiral downwards, I started going, okay, well, I need to add more. And then do I want to also be able to do push-ups. So I started doing just one push-up a day. And again, once that became normal, I would start adding, one here and there. So I just started building that way. And again, the whole time I was thinking, okay, I know it's going to cause symptoms. If I can say it's not the worst I've ever had it, I'm not making it worse. So I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And then I would get to a point where I'd level out. And then that's when I would know to go back to the doctor and say, all right, I think we need more treatment. So I did that a couple different times. So
So, do you think that being in Afghanistan affected you at all in any way, or do you think all this stuff was completely unrelated? I mean, is it like I mean, I guess my question is, did you ever get any answers as to the origin of your symptoms?
No, it was probably just a compilation of just a typical boy's life. I mean, I was very rambunctious as a kid. I got hurt all the time. I mean, I was like crazy. I'd jump off. I had no problem jumping off crap. Like, I'd literally jump off a house, things like that. Just stupid shit. I had like a trick bike. I thought I was like a BMX dude. I mean, the guy I joined the Navy with, actually, him and I would go do trick stuff all the time, and we'd end up on our ass like in wreck all the time. When I was in Afghanistan, I got hit with a softball twice, in the face, once like right here, that basically made me go blind for like 30 seconds, uh, and then like a couple weeks later, like in the side of the head. So there was like some stuff, but I think ultimately it was the compilation of when I got back from Afghanistan. I didn't know. Even though I had psoriasis my entire life, one, I didn't know that psoriasis could turn into psoriatic arthritis. Nobody ever talked to me about that. I've seen seen a couple of doctors about the psoriasis trying to get that under control, but nobody ever told me about that diet can control it, nor did they tell me that it could get worse. So when I got back from Afghanistan, of course, did you go to Afghanistan at all?
No, I did
No.
not.
So when you're over there, you pretty much eat salad and chicken. That's pretty much the only thing they serve you, right? So like, so you eat fairly clean by not by necessarily by choice, but by necessity. So when I got back, of course, then you had all the processed food and everything here in the States and everything. So I started going back to our normal American diet here when I get back from that. So that affected my body. I didn't know it, but it affected my psoriasis and the psoriatic arthritis significantly. That was part of it. The sinus infection, the antibiotic they put me on, Cipro, again, if it was explained to me, I didn't understand it, but I don't believe it was explained to me that it could cause long-term ligament damage, right? And tendons and ligaments, connective tissue. Having a connective tissue issue already and adding that on top of it certainly didn't help out. So probably these things in conjunction. And then again, lifting the weights, I felt something pop up here. So I think at that point, I did damage to my thoracic spine that caused a lot of like instability and issues there. And then again, eventually tightness and dysfunction there. And because your thoracic spine does some rotational stuff, because I couldn't, it wouldn't rotate. I think my neck, this is all speculation, of course, but my neck took up all of the rotation. So then there probably was something minor there before, but then I just continuously made it worse. So probably just a compilation of
That makes
everything
sense.
that was just like, but the problem being is that doctors aren't very good about understanding the human body, ironically, right? So they tell you when you get something injured to stop moving it, but that's the worst advice you could tell somebody. Like you should actually move it more. Just find a way to get into it semi-comfortably and then work out of it, unless it's like a fracture, right? Like something like that. But like you sprain your ankle, for instance, like you shouldn't stay off of it because then when you stay off of it, your body just goes, oh, we don't need it anymore. So it actually quickly stops moving properly. So then you start having like limited mobility in your ankles, and then limited mobility in ankles translates to limited mobility of your hips and affect your shoulders and all these different things. Like you don't understand it because it's minor at the time, but then it just builds. So then you have all these different inefficiencies within your body that you just don't quite understand, and nobody's addressing, that builds up then to something that's not supposed to be working hard, is working way too hard, and then causes all these different issues. So if you can catch it earlier, you could help alleviate all of the problems.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's amazing how the human body adapts in all circumstances. And I truly believe that there's a lot of people that are walking around with essentially adaptations that maybe
Yeah,
we don't necessarily realize are adaptations. We've just kind of lived with it.
yeah,
For example, I discovered when I was active duty that one of my legs is longer than the other, something that happened when I was younger, but my body has adapted
yeah,
to it. And when
yeah,
you get those answers of like, oh, well, this is why you have pain here, or this is why you
yeah,
do this, or like, this is why my toes curl on one foot to adapt for that. It's really interesting to make those discoveries. I
yeah.
am curious to learn more about the doctor that you saw in Colorado and that therapy. How was that different than any of the other therapies or modalities that you had tried in the past?
Because it's stem cells. His procedure is he goes in the morning and takes stem cells out of your hip, so bone marrow concentrate, and then he spins it up in his lab. He's his own lab, and then he injects it into the spots that need to heal. Because ligaments and tendons, that's connective tissue, don't typically have enough blood flow. They don't heal as well. So the stem cells themselves help. There's other methods for stem cells, like you can get like PRP, things like that, platelet-rich plasma. I think there's called PPP, which is platelet-poor plasma, all the different things, But again, it's all from your own body. Those work, but they need more treatments. The problem with where my problem was, being the neck and the skull and the neck ligament, the only way to get to that without going through your brainstem is through your mouth. So his procedure is going through the mouth, but it's got to be really very careful, obviously, because it's like right there by your brainstem. Like a little slip up, you're dead. So um, the stem cells themselves help rebuild the ligaments to strengthen them, tighten them, and then you have to then where I work with a physical therapist then to strengthen the rest of the things around it, then to be able to like fully heal. There is a huge mental component to that, though, which people don't understand. And this is usually why people fail at like physical therapy or don't heal from that, right? Or get fully over it. Because they still think, well, if I'm getting pain, it's still bad. But the pain is just because you're hitting an end range. But what you don't recognize is the end range may be here one day and then here and then here and then here. You just see the or feel the pain, but you're not recognizing that the limits are moving. So people quit, right? And they don't continue because they don't have the mental strength to go like, well, I can keep going, right? To be able to assess that. They also have been told they could be conditioned by other doctors and things like that throughout their life to assess that pain is bad. But what I've learned through this is that pain's not bad. It's just a signal telling you that you're at a range. So again, this is why I do in the mental side of it, going like, okay, if it's not worse than it's ever been, I'm not making it worse. If it goes away after a couple hours or the next day or whatever it is, then again, I was just finding a limit that is then able to be moved eventually. So I was able to kind of assess through this process to be able to continue along the path and then get to a point where I'm healing, which is actually really important because, my physical therapist actually said like he's literally never ever seen anybody progress as much as I have. And
That's
I'm not
incredible.
special. I'm too stupid to understand. I'm not supposed to, I guess, or
No, that's incredible to hear. I did want to touch a little bit on you talked about being a Spartan athlete, and so
Mhm.
obviously the transition from barely being able to function day to day to being a Spartan athlete is quite the jump. So
Yeah.
talk us through that part of your journey.
So one of the programs I was doing is this heroic program for the mental professional skills. to be able to coach people and stuff like that, learn the skills and for myself and then be able to coach other people. And at the end of their program, they want you to complete a Spartan race or some kind of obstacle-based race or something that has some kind of obstacle barriers that you have to overcome kind of thing that's in more kind of community-based. So I think it was after my second procedure, I was getting better and I was going to try one with them in LA when I was at a conference with them in LA. This is before I didn't quite understand the mind body connection at that point quite yet, like not fully. And I'd seen something in my online medical chart that kind of threw my brain in a spiral and caused my body to seize up again and then caused like lots of pain and in my hip area. And I wasn't able to start the race. I wasn't able to do the race, and that really bothered me. So I was like, no, I'm gonna. And then that morning, I took a what's it called? No, not a Valium. What's the Vicodin? I took a Vicodin. I was doing a heat pads. I was doing ice. I was doing tens. I was like, I'm trying to be able to make this. I just couldn't get it to calm down enough to be able to do it. So I said, all right, I'm going to figure this out. So that a couple months later, I ended up getting my third treatment, and then I started working with a physical therapist. And I was like, all right, so my goal was to end of 2023 was to do a Spartan, the DC Spartan was the one that's kind of local. So I ended up doing that. That was my first one. And after completing that, I had a friend of mine did it with me, and my goal was just to be able to start this time. I was like, look, I couldn't even get to the starting line for this first one. So my goal, if I can get to the starting line, that's a win for me. And if I can get to the finish line, even better. And I ended up doing it in 90 minutes. And I got through all but one of the obstacles I was able to complete by myself. And, he helped me with the other one. So I was able to complete all that. But then I was like, this isn't the end. I'm gonna do this more. I want to do more and I want to complete the longer races. I want to be able to do this more efficiently. And so give me something to work towards because I think as human beings, we're goal oriented, right? So if we don't have something to work towards, then it's really hard to continue going, right? And you have to have a really clear definition of like, people are like, oh, you should just work out because you got better health. Well, what the hell does that mean, right? Like, how do you measure that, right? Like, you can't really do that. So it's like, okay, no, I'm going to do this workout to try to improve to be able to functionally do this. So that would give me a target to work towards. So I started down that path. And then Spartan has a couple different distances. They did that first one they was a 5K, and then they have a 10K and a 21K. So I was like, I want to try to do all three in 2025. I want to try to do all three distances or 2024. So that was my initial goal going into 2024. I was like, okay, well now I've done one. I want to do all three of them. I did the 5K in March in Atlanta, and then I did a couple more 5Ks after that with some other people and stuff. And then I was like trying to plan out when I was going to do the 21K. And then I realized I was going to do it at the end of the year, which is a half marathon with a bunch of obstacles and it through the mountains, right? So I was like, okay, I realized I was afraid of it. I was like, I kept pushing it off, pushing it off, pushing it off. I was like trying to find somebody else to go do it with me because I was like, and I was like, shit, I'm afraid of this. Like, you know what? This was like in, I think, April. And I was like, I'm just going to find one that's close to me that's really soon so I can't back out of it. I'm just going to sign up for it. So I signed up for one in May in Fayetteville. And I was like, I guess I got to figure it out. I wasn't really fully trained for it. But I was like, you know what? I have to go after it because now I'm afraid of it. So I ended up going down there. I got like 9 miles in and I was feeling pretty good. I should say about 8.5 miles in, I was feeling pretty good. And then I like hit a brick wall, like right at like 9 miles. And I was right at the obstacle, this obstacle that I really wanted to try. And my body just shut down. Like my legs went out. Like I was like, what the hell? So I was like laying there. I was like fighting this like demons inside, going like, I'm dying. I'm gonna die here on this course. No, I'm good. No, I'm dying. No, I'm good. Like soul cycle. I laid there for probably 60 to 90 minutes. Just at this obstacle. Like the volunteer gave me some water. There's a couple people that give me some like salt packs and things like that to kind of like give me some like nutrition. And then the volunteer ended up giving me like a bag of Fritos, which I hadn't had anything like that in like quite a while. So I was like, well, no, screw it. I gotta get something in me. So I ate those Fritos and then the temperature dropped. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try this. It's only like 4 miles left. I want to try this obstacle. If I can get through this obstacle, let's see what happens, right? So I ended up doing the obstacle and I was like, all right, well, I think I can walk the rest of it, like I should be. So I ended up getting through that. And so again, that I kind of get sparked me to continue to want to go because I had that goal there. Like, no, I started, I have to finish it, right? So it gave me something to really work towards and like, work on the mental side of things and like really see how much my mind and my body are just like, or my body is really controlled by the mind. Did that answer your question? I don't know if I really
It
answered your
did.
question.
Yeah, I have so many more questions, but we're running towards the end of the clock here. But I did want to ask you if there's any point in your journey when you felt like a failure.
Talking about since the treatments or
Yeah, I
like,
mean just in general, because you've been through
oh
all
yeah.
things. And I mean this can go back as far as you want it to, right? Because
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
very broad generalized question, but some key things that I hear in your story is that, you something will knock you down and it might take some time, but you get back up and you continue to progress. And it sounds like or throughout this time, you're building this muscle memory to
Yeah.
where, failure is not an option anymore. And so I was legitimately curious if there were times throughout your journey where you did feel like a failure.
Yeah, especially early on when I didn't really understand the mental component of it and I didn't address it properly. And then also physically, and I didn't understand this again until I started down that path, is that, and I was always a physical person. So I'd always get my frustration out physically. But when that got taken away because of the health issues, like I didn't have that outlet. So I was a failure. I felt like a failure there because I didn't know how to manage my own emotions properly. I felt like a failure because I couldn't protect my family, right? I was like, man, I feel like I was legitimately concerned that, like, not that I'm like the best fighter in the world, never have been, but I always felt confident enough to where, like, if something happened, I could take care of my family or myself, whoever, people around me. I legitimately got to a point where I was like, I feel like I'm actually a burden to them because if somebody tries to attack us, like not only will I not be able to stop them, I might actually make it worse because, I might make them more of a target. I also got to a point where I was like, when we go places, I wouldn't be able to stay. So I was like, man, you guys, I'm legitimately making your life worse because you can't even go have fun because the whole time you're worrying about whether or not I'm gonna break down and need to leave. So like, yeah, it was bad. Like I felt like I was letting everybody down. Like I was a burden to everybody around me. And that's why, again, that's another reason why I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna die.
Yeah.
I actually legitimately felt like I was worth more to my family dead than I was alive because then I wasn't going to be a burden to them. They would get my life insurance, like so they had money that way. I was like, I'm worth more dead to my family. And not that they said that, right? But like that's how I felt. So I was like,
Yeah.
I can't be a man. Like I can't play the role I'm supposed to play for my family because I'm so broken and nobody's willing to help me and I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
So I was like, might as well just die because then at least I could take care of them financially, with life insurance and different things I had. So
Yeah, I think that's relatable for a lot of veterans, especially the ones who had physical injuries coming out of service. And I think I see
yeah.
that a lot lately, even on Facebook or different veterans pages where vets are opening up about, the struggles that they're really dealing with. And so I appreciate that you
Mm,
shared that, some vulnerable moments in your life, and that you continue to share your story with people because it really, at the end of the day, it's incredibly inspiring. And I know we're just hearing like a small sliver because obviously this journey for you has been years and years, and we hear it in a matter of an hour, and it just doesn't add up to the magnitude of what everything really was that you experienced. But at the end of the day, there are so many people who can relate to a bit of your story, and so I think it's important that
yeah.
you continue to share it. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, share a little bit about yourself with the listeners, and if anyone's listening to this and you do relate, please let us know on social media platforms. Reach out through the website. And I'm sure Kevin would love to hear about people that can relate and the people that he's continued to inspire throughout his journey and sharing his story. But just wanted to say thank you, Kevin. And are there any last words or a piece of advice that you want to leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I like to say that, you know, never underestimate the power of the word yet. And I think that's really what I've used to cycle through for me is it's like if I add the word yet to any statement, then it becomes more powerful. It's like I don't have this capability yet. Right? Like I'm not there yet. It gives me inspiration and hope that, hey, you know what, may not be where I want to be, but I have time to get there. I'm going to eventually build to that. So when I add that word yet to something, then it's all of a sudden now I have hope that I'm going to be capable of doing that. I just remembered that the whole time is being able to say, yeah, I may not be physically capable yet. I may not be fixed yet, but it's coming. Like if I just keep putting in the work, then it's gonna be there.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.